Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 475. My name is Minter Dial, and I'm your host for this podcast, a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows on this growing network, please visit evergreenpodcast.com. This week's interview is with my friend Edwin Rutsch. Edwin is the founder of the Culture of Empathy and has spent the last couple of decades spreading empathy, helping to bridge social and political divides. He's built an academic empathy training literature database on a wiki and has launched himself as a politician. In this conversation with Edwin, we discuss his journey, his driving purpose, the value of empathy in life and politics, the empathy circle that he co-created with Lidewij Niezink, his empathy tent actions, and much more. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com. And please, if you would, drop in your rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show. Edwin Rutsch, how lovely to have you on my show. I have had the opportunity to meet with you, to participate in your empathy circles, get trained by you, to run empathy circles. And for those who know me, I've been loving providing or running empathy circles pretty much once a month ever since. So I owe you and Lidewij, of course, your co-founders of the Empathy Circle technique for conversation, dialogue. In your own words, Edwin, how do you like to describe yourself?
Oh, how do I describe myself? Well, first, I'm really grateful that you called me to have a discussion. We've talked before, so it's really great to see you again. You'd written about empathy, and so we've had different conversations about the role of empathy and the importance of empathy. So thanks for reaching out, and good to talk with you. And for myself, how do I describe myself? I would say an empathy activist. I did a lot of world traveling. In my younger years, traveled all over the world, was a bit of a seeker. So maybe I was a seeker, just really seeking. And about 14, 15 years ago, I came across the value of empathy and thought, wow, this is really what I was seeking. It's like, how do we connect more deeply with other people and, see each other's humanity? And, ever since then, just been working quite intensely on how do we build a more empathic culture? How do we build a movement to make empathy a primary social and cultural value? Yeah.
And certainly you've got a community of people I've met thanks to you, the authors, and certainly it seems that the movement is gaining traction. I want to just go back to that moment 14 years ago, Edwin, because for a lot of people, I think struggle to find what it is that they're seeking. This notion of passion or purpose. And I don't imagine it was like a light switch moment, but describe to us what happened and how you sort of came across the aha, this is it.
Yeah, for me, I don't have these big aha, the clouds open, the light shines down.
The rain comes pouring down.
Moments. It tends to be kind of slow. It's like, I grew up religious, and it's like I never became like an atheist, like, oh, I got the, something happened. It's like slowly, just became less and less religious to where I just don't even think about really, religion per se. So it's a very slow evolution. And with the empathy, it was, I was making documentaries about human values. And at that time, the conservatives, George Bush, I think it was talking about Republican values. And I sort of identified as a progressive. And I thought, well, what are progressive values? And I started interviewing, people about those values. And when people started talking about empathy and care being values, it's like you'd see their eyes start tearing up, watering. I thought, wow, you could just kind of feel that sort of depth, that opening, when that happens. I thought, this is really important. Empathy seems to be really a core value. And the more I looked into it, the more it really resonated with what I'd been searching, for all those years, starting off very conservative, fundamentalist Christian traveling around the world, just meeting all kinds of people, starting to say, oh, I don't have all the answers. It's really about human connection, making friends everywhere in the world and in all kinds of different cultures, and just seeing that common humanity. So when I came across the word empathy, it was like it kind of named sort of that experience. And then I started looking into it. And then I saw, other people were, like Carl Rogers, if you're familiar with him, he's
Sure.
considered one of the top clinical psychologists, 2 or 3 top clinical psychologists. And he had talked about the importance of empathy and laid out, pretty much articulated the importance of it. And then a little bit later, Barack Obama started running for office, and he said, the country has an empathy deficit. I thought, yeah, I can work on that. I can kind of help contribute to that. And there was other, writers, a guy named George Lakoff, he's an academic within progressive circles, who wrote about, empathy being a core progressive value. And I just dug into it. And yeah, it's just become a whole life's mission now. And I must say, I've kind of left conservative progressive. I'm now on the empathic side. I've kind of left those political labels to really see we need to get this different sides to talk with each other.
Yeah. So when you were looking at these people and their eyes were tearing up, I get the feeling it was like you were looking into the depths of humanity. This is what was pouring through their eyes.
Yeah, it was like what was important to them, right? It's like what was really important. When you hear that all the time, right? With people on their deathbed, it's like, oh, they got a new. Do they remember a new car they got? Do they remember a job promotion, or reaching a certain level? It's like, oh, it's the family, it's the connection, the love, the care I had, with these people that is really important to me. So it was seeing that, that essence of what's really important at a deeper level. And for me, the empathy is sensing into someone's experience. It's sort of the process of feeling into each other's being and in seeing that humanity in each other. So I see the empathy as sort of this gateway to that sort of awareness.
And before we get into more of a technical definition of empathy, when you talk about the conservatives or the political spheres, I heard that you think of it more as a progressive value rather than a conservative value. Maybe qualify that, and or to what extent is this notion of empathy equally appealing and deep on both sides of the spectrum?
I don't see it as a progressive value anymore. I would say I see kind of the lack of empathy on both sides and the empathy on both sides of the political. Mm-hmm. And so like I said, I don't really see I don't really see myself as, progressive per se, that I'm kind of taking the empathic approach, which means, hey, I'm willing to listen to progressives. I'm willing to listen to Republicans or conservatives, and I want to bring them together to dialogue with each other. So I just wanted to be, clear that I've kind of moved, growing up conservative, moving to a progressive. Now I've moved to this sort of third point of view, which is really just seeing the humanity of both sides, and just just seeing that they're not really, both sides aren't really listening to each other, especially with the polarization here in the United States. It's I think, and both sides have responsibility for that. And I find that when I do like empathy circles, empathic listening circles, conservatives really get it. They appreciate it. They appreciate the free speech of it. They appreciate the being listened to. They appreciate, so both sides attack each other, but they also, both sides can sort of appreciate the mutual listening with each other. So yeah.
Presumably it's more you doing the listening than the other side still in these sort of combative jousts between the sides.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
let's go into empathy itself. And you have spent a long time exploring it. And like me, you've probably seen that there are many different ways of thinking about empathy. So I'd love to hear what your version of exactly what is empathy and just how far does it go?
Yeah, there's different threads in terms of definitions, and it can get rather confusing because of the different ways people define it. My definition is based on the work of Carl Rogers, who I mentioned before.
Rogerian therapy.
Rogerian therapy, which is basically it's you listen to someone in that therapeutic structure. You don't try to tell them what to do. You don't try to direct them with questions. You don't judge them. You just are present and listen to someone and hear where they are and just see what emerges. And you may reflect back your understanding to make sure that you hear them correctly and that they feel that you hear and understand them. So it's that sense of sensing into the experience of someone else and just seeing what unfolds, sort of going on their journey, on their inner journey with them. It's like you're a companion on someone's journey, listening to them fully, not saying, hey, no, let's go this direction. Let's go that direction. No, your direction is bad. You're stupid, or all the judgments, all those things are, or I'm not going to go on your journey with you, sort of detaching, right? It's all those things that block empathy is another component. It's the being present with the person, going with them on their journey until they feel heard, seen, and acknowledged. But I think that's sort of the basics of empathy. But what I'm really interested in is the mutuality of it. Usually empathy is defined as this individualistic, you as an individual listening to someone else. But I think it's really about the mutuality of the listening and measuring empathy and how well are we listening to each other. And that's usually not how it's kind of defined. It's more defined in that generally, I think in the culture is this individualistic listening or not listening. And I think we need to see it as this mutuality. And that's what the empathy circle practice is about. It's not going to a therapist where the therapist, for example, just listens to you and that's it. And you pay them money, you go on your way. An empathy circle is, we listen to each other, right? It's this mutuality of listening to each other. And that's really a more fuller sense of empathy, and setting aside those what would be maybe blocks to empathy, judgment, sympathy, projecting your own self onto them, ignoring people, etc. And we could go for quite a while into all the ways that empathy is blocked. That state, that way of being, is blocked. Yeah.
Well, when you're in a one-way situation where you are listening to another, like I am listening to you in an interview, or a therapist listening to a patient, it seems easier at some level because there's material coming and you have to focus as the listener and thinking about just what's being said and observing and then reformulating back. When it's in the mutuality story, what happens is that mentor starts thinking, well, he has something to say about what you just said. And oftentimes we feel the need to jump in. And so then we restrain. I'm going to hold back. I know I have to be listening. But that thought sort of dissipates over time because I'm still listening. And the ability for you to retain intelligent thoughts as the length of the person draws out, you don't get a chance to you don't even remember it anymore. And so that I think that's one of the biggest challenges I face, Edwin, in the notion of mutuality, because you want to be respectful. You got all these other things you're going on and focusing on listening to what's being said. And yet, if it's in a mutual discourse where I can rebut, I need to know the facts. If I'm rebutting a thing you said, you said it was 9% this, and I have to remember that fact. But if I start focusing on that fact, then I lose the ability to listen.
Yeah. So as you're listening to me, all these different things are coming up in your mind. And if you just keep listening, they're going to start fading away, and you kind of, I don't know if you're sensing that as a problem or a concern, or you
Well,
want to be able to, yeah.
I think of it as a challenge in
Mm-hmm.
mutuality. That's the point.
Yeah.
Because as much as when it's one way, you know the rules. But when you are in a discourse where there's two people talking with one another, not at one another, where there's mutual listening going on, it's what point do you start tipping it back to, well, what I want to say as opposed to what I'm listening to you say?
Yeah, the empathy circle, we put in times. So first, you do reflective listening. So as a speaker, you pause periodically so the listener can reflect back their understanding, just to sort of check, am I really hearing you, and am I really following you, which the listener has to really focus to be able to say that
No
back.
kidding.
So that really puts your presence, it's like your presence has to really be there. Your attention has to be there, focused. And so you can do that reflection. Then the speaker says some more, they say some more, they correct you if you're not reflecting, you're recapping what you heard. And then, we have like time limits of 5 minutes, because some people could go on for hours, right?
No
and then
doubt.
they go on for hours, and what else happens in that? It's like you start thinking, oh, let me out of here. It's like, I have all this kind of stuff that I'd like to say too. They're not listening. I just can't even find a way in to, share. So you disengage, like you're saying, you just detach, you feel a sense of disconnection. And the reflection actually helps with the sense of connection too, right?
Sure.
When you're reflecting back, it feels like, oh, I have that sense, like, oh, I stay connected because I'm reflecting back, and that sense of connection feels good. But then we have time turn limits of like 5 minutes or 6 minutes, so it does turn. So the attention shifts. Exactly. You've got a 5-minute little sign that you just held up as an example. So we have a little sign that we hold up, facilitator holds, so that it has a sense of mutuality. And it's sort of like training wheels, like I've done these empathy circles in my family where we go maybe 2.5 hours, or even 3 hours, talking about some family issues. And then suddenly we just stop doing the time limits or even the reflection, because we've sort of tipped into a state of mind where everybody's really attuned and listening to each other. We don't even need these training wheels kind of the empathy circle. So because we've stepped into that deep awareness and space and listening for everyone.
My observation, Edwin, for having done, I don't know, maybe myself, certainly over 50 empathy circles, is that only happens after the first hour. It feels like just the human condition needs more than an hour for that to gel, at least when you're talking multiple people. I usually do with 5 people in total. And then the second hour, we get off the I've got to tell you shit. I've got to drive my agenda. This is everything I know, and I'm going to show off all the things that are on my chest. In the second hour, it feels like inevitably we're using the material from what's happened before, because we've been doing the listening, and then we're integrating that into what we have to say. Yet, my point about the mutuality challenge is, in real life, I think we're far too quick to get back onto my horse. What I want to say, interruption, because time is limited. I have a dinner party going to in 1.5 hours. I don't have time for this. And so you kind of need to rush in all your stuff. And I feel that time is one of the biggest anxiety producers at some level, probably at a meta level, as well as in the crux of our conversation.
Yeah, I totally with you there. That sense of time, that empathy takes time. That I think it was Stephen Covey, the leadership guru. He says empathy takes time, but it doesn't take anywhere as much time as when you have to go clean up the mess that you didn't that you created by not giving it time, right? It's like you have relationships, right, that take, you're having years and years of conflict because you didn't take that initial time to begin with. So I think there's sort of a, like a penny wise, pound foolish aspect with time. Like I have to do this right now. By not putting that time up front to have that listening, you're going to pay for it somewhere. Maybe it's your health, maybe it's, stress, maybe it's just poor relationships. So I think time's a big issue around empathy.
So another thing so when we talk about the splitting of hairs and the different versions of empathy, I was and am still interested in the difference between cognitive and affective, the idea of hearing what you say and seeing what you feel, or feeling what you feel. And in my experience, and probably because I'm not as strongly versed, whenever I'm trying to gauge without judgment someone's feelings, I feel it's a lot more treacherous, the zone, as opposed to regurgitating what someone else has just said to me. Well, you've said this to me. This is how I heard what you say. But if I put that aside and I say what I saw, you feel, some kind of perplexity, or the choice of word that you use as a label to describe that feeling feels a lot more unnerving for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're talking about the cognitive and emotional empathy. That's a term that's used a lot. I don't use it because I think it doesn't really fit very well. For example, when we do the empathy circle, you can reflect someone, like you're saying, just sort of word for word, what the person says. But I find that over time, like you're saying, after the first hour or so, you kind of go deeper. So I don't like judge people like you're just, it's just saying the words to begin with. It's just like reflect back, the best you can. And it's really the role of the speaker to say whether they've been heard or not. The goal is for the speaker to have a sense of feeling heard, seen, and acknowledged. And so that you're kind of like, as the speaker, you're kind of like the teacher, like you're sharing. If somebody just reflects back the words and it's like, no, I don't feel really seen. I'm feeling frustration. I'm feeling a sense of frustration. I didn't hear that feeling of frustration reflected back. So I guess I'm putting a lot of responsibility on the speaker to be heard as they would like to be heard. And then over time too, the listener kind of gets better at it. I think I kind of just let people start wherever they are and then sort of slowly get better at maybe naming feelings like you're saying, because that does bring the conversation to a deeper level. If you can, maybe someone is frustrated, they'll say that they're frustrated and you say, I hear you're frustrated. They might not say they're frustrated, but you can see that they're very frustrated. And then you can sort of name that because you've sort of seen it and sensed it and felt it. And then they'll say, yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. And, they feel really good because you've seen who they are and you've sort of sensed into them. So in terms, I don't kind of differentiate the cognitive and emotional because it's so intertwined and so I don't even think and from what I'm hearing from the academics, they're already starting to move away from that term. When academics said in 10 years, they won't even talk about that anymore because it's just such an ineffective breakdown. What I would say, there's a difference between empathy, sensing into, and then relational empathy and imaginative empathy. So and I could just describe that if you wanted. What I'm seeing is imaginative empathy. So if we're talking here, you're empathizing with me. I can sense your presence. You're really listening to me, and you have a lot of presence, a lot of concentration, and I can feel that. So you're sensing into me, empathizing with me. The imaginative empathy is what I would say is a role taking, and a clear example would be is if you and I now took on roles, like I said, it's like an actor, like Meryl Streep being Margaret Thatcher or Julia Childs. You take on the role of someone, and I could take on the role of Julia Childs, and you could take on the role of Margaret Thatcher, and then we would have a dialogue with each other. So we're stepping into these roles and speaking from what comes up in us in those roles, and we're and it's like you can sort of embody that. And I see this in mediation too. If you've ever done like mediation training, you do practicing this imaginative role taking. You create scenarios of conflict, and you take on roles of a business or a family or people in conflict, and then you speak from that role. So that's a very clear, delineation between just listening to someone, sensing into them, and then this imaginative empathy of stepping into a role. And you can take on any role. I can take on the role of what's it like to be a banana, It's like, right? What does it feel like, and have a dialogue? I think that's what the scientist, when with relativity, Einstein, right? It's like he imagined himself being a beam of light. Like, what is my experience being a beam of light with the trains and, all this kind of these different, he would take on these different roles of the objects and sort of experience it from that role. And so the imaginative empathy, taking on roles, is just like unlimited. We can take on any kind of a role. And so that's how I would delineate. Instead of cognitive and emotional, I would make it just empathy, maybe relational empathy, the mutuality level of empathy, and then imaginative empathy, taking on different roles like that.
My name is Cindy Burnett, and each week I interview at least 2 traditionally published authors on my podcast, Thoughts from a Page. We talk spoiler-free about their books, so you can listen whether you have read the book or not. And then we delve into things that you most likely won't hear about anywhere else. The importance of the cover design, why they included various aspects of the story, personal details about both the books and the authors' lives, and so much more. You can find the podcast on every major platform and learn more about it on my website, thoughtsfromapage.com. Thanks so much for checking it out.
To use your term, Edwin, I would characterize imaginative empathy like that very much a practice version, because we say that reading well-written novels, fiction, is also a great way to get to understand other people to the extent that they're written with nuance. You can start to lean into the feelings and expressions and experiences of if you're a man, a female character, or such different types of people, so you can imagine into these other roles. Yeah. The area I wanted to get into was, following what you said, is this notion in society of masks. I'm not talking about COVID. The one where we have these projections of who we are. And so you can project tranquility and listening, and put aside your passions, because in order for me to be able to listen without judgment, I have to know how to not let that get the better of me. You might trigger me with a word, and so I have to use a sense of restraint, not to let that trigger override my ability to listen to you. And then on the other side, there's passion, where you got something really you want to say. And it's been my observation that the more passionate you are, the harder it is for you to listen to the other. So on the one hand, you've got this mask story, which probably has good values in terms of allowing you to listen better, because you're putting aside your own ego. And yet at some level, there's a notion of not tapping into your own passions. And especially when you get into the mutuality story, it may be hard to go places when you are living behind a mask and not allowed to live your passion.
Yeah, that the thing with the mask, it's like a lot of times empathy is seen as neutral. It's like you're not being you, but I think it's actually you're being a deeper you. You're bringing your presence forward. So it's not like a neutral thing. It's an action. So as you're listening to someone, or as you're listening to me, you might be setting aside some judgments or some, like, you wanted to be doing something else or whatever. you're setting all that aside and bringing your full presence forward, which is something. It's a lot. It's huge, to bring your presence forward. So I don't see empathy as a neutral. I think it's a stance. It's a very strong stance, and sort of a strong way of being. You might be setting aside your judgments, but are we really our judgments? Are we really our stereotyping of other people? Are we really, are trying to dominate other people? Is that who we really are? It's like you're setting aside those things, I think, to bring a deeper, stronger, more meaningful sense of yourself forward. And this whole thing about empathy being neutral, I don't see it that way. Again, at another angle is that when you're empathic with someone, your oxytocin level goes up. There's physiological stuff that's happening. You're becoming calmer. You're becoming more relaxed. Your cortisol is being counteracted with oxytocin, and your depth of field, your field-dependent thinking, which is the space of how you can make decisions, it becomes broader and wider. So I think you actually make better decisions. I saw that term field-dependent thinking in some IDEO, human-centered design work, where they talk about the space that you make your decisions from. There's a constellation of different feelings, ideas, and the bigger, broader your field of that is, the better your decision making, or even the deeper your decision making. So I see empathy as not neutral, as I was saying, but a very strong presence. And Carl Rogers also talks about it as being a strong, calm, way of being. It's not easy for a lot of people just to have that sense of groundedness and calmness to be able to listen to others. And you can be passionately for empathy, right? Yeah. And the empathy circle is say anything you want. Right. It's total free speech. I always make it a point that in the empathy circle, bring up any feeling, it can be anger, it can be passion, it's whatever you want to bring up. You are welcome to bring it up. And not only that, it will be heard, seen, and acknowledged, right? It's not going to be shut down. So you can be as passionate as you want. And someone will say, well, I'm really hearing a great deal of passion, really a real enthusiasm. You're really, this is really meaningful for you. Yeah. So, yeah.
And when we take this into society, or where we're not in the structured empathy circle, where we look at dialogue and debate in society, which seems to be in such a crippled state today, how can we? I mean, what are the types of? What's your viewpoint on how we can improve dialogue in society? Just because actually having the structured approach is one thing, but for everyone who's listening, they're going to go and maybe go to work or have a meeting, they're going to have dinner, and we're struggling, it seems, to be able to dive into conversations where we know we are at odds with one another. You hear people constantly saying, well, I don't speak to people in my family because they're on the other side of the spectrum. But it also can be niggly little things that have happened in our relationships, and it just seems that we've gotten to a standstill and it's not just in the United States. It's propagated by media who are needing to run down a certain political path in order to get eyeballs to be paid for their business model. So they're pushing singular slants, and then you say, well, that's the one I want to listen to. So you go to that ecosystem. I was wondering what your thoughts are on how do we get to have more meaningful conversations in general in life.
Yeah, how do we really shift the whole culture, which seems to be sort of against empathy and sort of this dysfunctional.
Me. It's a lot about me, and my topics, and I'm right. My facts are better than yours. What I believe is right, and you're wrong.
Yeah, and the self-righteousness.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, and the judgments, and I mean, we're kind of like swimming at it. It's like, hey, what do we do with this? It's definitely a challenge. I'll say one part of that is if by doing the empathy circle, I see it as sort of an empathy battery recharging station, right? You go there and you start getting heard, and it's like we all have that need to be heard, seen, and acknowledged, right? It's like there's just something that our body craves, that at least I seems, that's what it seems like to me. And so if you don't get that, and it's like I have to fight, for that being seen, you just go out there and it's a battle for the attention of others, right? So if you do an empathy circle, it's like, oh, I get seen and heard and acknowledged. It's like my need for being seen, heard, and acknowledged is sort of filled. And then I hear it over and over again. People say, oh, I did the empathy circle. Now when I go with my family, it's like I don't have this need to sort of battle to be heard. It's like I have more space, more sort of calmness. I can actually hear, what my father is saying, because usually he kind of triggers me, but I actually have this space to hear and see him. And so it's a step to get your empathy battery charged. So when you go into that crazy world of the empathy deficit, you've got more resilience to kind of turn things around. You can maybe have more space to listen to others, and then they feel seen and heard. And then, it can be sort of a ripple effect. But I do think we need a bigger cultural shift, and that's what I'm doing. We haven't talked about that, but
that's
I'm
what I want
running
to
for
speak about
Congress.
next.
Yeah, I'm running for Congress with the empathy as a message. And, it's like, hey, we need a cultural shift. We need to place empathy. And for me, that's just mutual listening, that we're willing to listen to each other and hear each other out as primary social, political, cultural values. And so that's the message I have. So that we can scale it up from just sort of this individual, you get your empathy and then you get kind of beaten down by the culture, to, hey, we need to have a whole cultural shift to make this a primary social value. And I think that takes a movement. And, that's what I'm trying to, you lead the empathy movement. I see your book there, you lead. Well, that's what we should be leading, is an empathy movement, and getting the politicians to listen to each other and model it. Imagine if George Bush and Biden and Trump would have had an empathy circle instead of a debate. That would have shifted through the whole culture. It's like, oh, this is how we do it. And that's what I actually did. The first thing I did running for Congress here in the San Francisco Bay Area, I reached out to the other candidates. I said, hey, let's do an empathy circle. And I was able to do it with two out of the five. Those, so it's three of us in the circle. And we did an empathy circle, right off the bat. And someone watched it, a woman watched it. And she said, it was so great to see this. It's like, everybody listening. She just felt such gratitude just to see, constructive dialogue going on. And she said, I want you all three to be in Congress, because that's what she wants to see in Congress, is the representatives actually listening to each other and dialoguing and hearing each other. So, yeah.
So I want to just circle back on one thought you mentioned, which is debate. Because for me, a great debater knows inside out the arguments on the other side, which essentially means that that person has done the homework and, if you will, has listened to what the other side is truly saying, not just the words, and thinking about how quickly can I debunk that. In real debate houses where you're really at it, you need to know inside out the arguments of the other side. And to some degree, it's really interesting to use debate as a practice where you don't even know which side you're going to defend up until the day they say, hey, Edwin, you're going to take right, and the other one's going to take left, or black and white or whatever. And then you have to then debate that with full intensity on that side, regardless of whether that's what you believe. And so I think debate has been polluted as a technique to listen to one another, because really, if you listen deeply to what the other person is saying, on top of that, the chances are you're going to get a better rebuttal, because you're not just going to speak my language on top of your language. I heard you say this, I'm going to be able to swing and sway about what you say. And then and then you come up with your position. And then the other person should, well, I heard you say this, and this is what's wrong with that. Or, of course, they do have to apply judgment in the case of debate, because at some level you need to make a choice. I wanted to end or at least this other thought, which is that somehow I see typically in the United States, there's typically two parties. I mean, of course, there are independents, but essentially I think of you being there's this one team on the left and there's another team on the right, or I think of it without being political bias, but you would be the referees. And we kind of need to have all three, just like this woman was referring to. You need to have referees. You need to have, in the House of Commons in England, we call it the Speaker, just like in the House of Representatives in America. And it's less the speaker and more the listener.
Yeah, so I see that with the dynamics that I see as an underlying dynamics is that I see, community out there of people arguing with each other. I go and listen to one side, and then I go listen to the other side. So I actually offer that listening to the different sides. But it's beyond that. It's like then supporting the sides and talking to each other, right? And so that's sort of the next step. And then the next step is that, hey, how about we do training so you become mediators or the listeners or the facilitators so that they can each learn the practice of how to be facilitators. So it's sort of a cultural shift by being willing to listen first, inviting the others to listen back, listen to each other, and then learn how to listen to each other. So I guess I'm trying to shift the battle component to a listening component, to put the mutual listening front and center. And in terms of, if you're talking about debate, you hear the terms straw man and steel man, right? Straw man is you make these kind of unscrupulous arguments that are just, you create something that you can tear it down, but it's not really, authentically what the other person said. That's the straw man. And then the steel man is that you can reflect back, you understand the argument that the other person is making even better than they're making it themselves, and then you can have your response. And that has it's sort of merging the battle, the debate, right, the win-lose into, it's kind of bringing some empathic awareness to it. And I imagine it's going to help your, having a real sense of integrity in terms of your debate. It's going to having that empathic sense. But I think we can even move past the battle to really making it about, it's no longer, putting everybody into the ring, but everybody listening to each other constructively. And like you said, after you get past the first hour or so, people are kind of moving into a deeper realm where kind of more creativity, innovation can take place. So yeah, I'm for sort of shifting the whole culture to placing this, mutual listening kind of as a primary value.
Where I have spent my time is in business and talking about trying to bring empathy into business. And amongst the things that makes people less open to it, there's this notion of, well, if I listen to you, I'm going to cave into you. If I listen to you, I'm weak. I should be the one dictating with great power, everything that I need to say, and I'm the one that knows, and I'm the best. And then there's this time factor, because bloody hell, if I spend all my time listening, I have to decide, I have to operate, I have to do things. And in the political field, you could argue in the business in the same kind of way, you have to get voted for. And the challenge we have in today's world is that if you sound like you're saying the same thing as your opponent, then the narrative, and the way it's so combative and gladiatorial in the way you do the advertisements and shoot down your opponent, whether it's some personal or professional thing, we've lost. And I think this is also true in society, this ability to give the time to listen and connect back into really how absolutely unimportant we are on the face of this earth, and move aside the ego, and then unite under some bigger idea as to why we are all together. We get so hooked up on the size of my car, the title I have, the fact that someday you need to win, though, to get the job. And so there's a dynamic that's very difficult to play, especially when you've got a gladiatorial situation at the end of the day. They can't vote for 3 candidates. They've got to vote for 1.
Yeah, with the gladiatorial model, I see that as well. Even our justice system is a gladiatorial, right? It's like you hire 2 lawyers, aka gladiators, to battle out to come to truth, and then there's a judge, external judgment, versus all the parties coming together, having that deeper dialogue to work through. And I think the solutions that come out through that deeper dialogue are a deeper agreement, and it's something people can live with, and they feel better about it in the long run. And those people who are striving to, to be heard for the car and all that, a lot of it is wanting to be seen and acknowledged. But if you've got that in the dialogue in your family, with your friends, you're seen. I don't think you need all those trappings to be seen and to be considered important or relevant, or so I do think it's a different, it's more of a deficit. It's more of a hunger for something, right? And that hunger is really that empathic presence and connection and care and love, I think, that come out of that.
One of the tools that I've had used, and I've occasionally used it in mediating to opposing sides, is to ask both sides to find something about the other side's argument with which they agree. So, Edwin, so you and I are gladiatorial, like whatever. But the thing you said at the beginning about the fact that you like blue skies, I agree with you. I really like blue skies too. And then the favor is returned. And that form of bridge building is delicious, because it takes away all of a sudden a lot of the prickliness, because actually we do have something in common. We both have 2 feet, 2 arms, 2 ears, and we have commonalities, but we tend to forget those. What would be 1 or 2 gifts that you'd give to people as they approach they're going on and looking for and getting more involved in deeper, more meaningful conversations, dialogues?
Yeah, well, I'm hearing there what you're saying is the finding that commonality. And we have a sense of commonality. We have a sense of connection, and that connection feels pretty good. I mean, disconnection is painful. Like disconnection is high degree of cortisol. Connection is oxytocin. You're kind of feeling warm and good. So I would say, going for that oxytocin is a way of being, and the sense of connection. The one thing that I do see is that universal sense of connection is is to mutually value the listening and the dialogue. At some level, everybody values that, right? So that if we can make the listening, the empathy as that shared value that we have, that no matter what the problem is, whatever the conflict is, that we can come together, we value coming together and dialoguing about it until it kind of gets worked out to everyone's satisfaction. If we can make that as a primary social value, I think it'll just transform society. So have the intention to spread that way of being and that message, I think, is one thing that we can do.
And like you said at the beginning, it's actually really quite powerful when you give all of your attention and are fully present. And like you say, you get the oxytocin going, you feel more relaxed. And on top of that, the chances are, I don't know who said it exactly. It was maybe it was Seven Habits, not Covey, or maybe it was Covey said, basically, if you go into a room and you meet somebody and all you do is ask them questions and listen to them, there's a high probability that at the end of the evening, they will say that you were the most important, most interesting person they've ever met. And yet you said nothing. All you did was listen.
Yeah, people appreciate that.
Makes for a good pitch, I think, for why we should listen to one another more. Edwin, how can people follow what you're doing, catch up with the movement, see some of your tools? I know you have a really robust site with so many resources. So give us your social handles and sites to visit.
Main website is cultureofempathy.com. You can go to edwinforcongress.com too. That's the new site, for my campaign. So that'll lead you to a lot of other social media connections, and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all that.
Well, this will be going live just before the vote. So those who are out in your CD8 district in San Francisco, go and listen to Edwin Rutsch and check out the debate. And with that, I have to thank you, Edwin. It has been a pleasure. That's the studio audience. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Minter. Great talking to you. Good listener.
Thank you. Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote. Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust is the reason. Still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust in my reason and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man, practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man, here in these confines. A convinced man in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, admit to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man in the arms of a woman.
My name is Cindy Burnett, and each week I interview at least 2 traditionally published authors on my podcast, Thoughts from a Page. We talk spoiler-free about their books, so you can listen whether you have read the book or not. And then we delve into things that you most likely won't hear about anywhere else. The importance of the cover design, why they included various aspects of the story, personal details about both the books and the authors' lives, and so much more. You can find the podcast on every major platform and learn more about it on my website, thoughtsfromapage.com. Thanks so much for checking it out.